This game has a strong hold if you're into the RTS genre, but it's fairly weak if you're a newcomer. Today we'll be looking at the HD re-release of Stronghold. For those of you who don't know, I'm Earth.Otherwise, and welcome to Game Review. Here I will be looking at a game and grading it in 27 categories. Sort of. If you want an in-depth description of the categories, a link can be found down below. I'll inform everybody here, new and old, that this review contains my personal opinions about the game and is not an objective analysis. For that, there's the Let's Analyze series. So let's get on with it. You can find Stronghold HD in the usual places: Steam, GOG, and a couple of YouTube videos. Though to be honest, Stronghold HD is relying on nostalgia from the older gaming generation to generate sales. Chances are that if you haven't heard of Stronghold before or don't care about the history of strategy games, you aren't going to care enough to buy it. I mean, with dozens of games coming out each week, who has the time to go back to something so old when newer games have innovated on its design? But let's say that you happen across a YouTube video of someone playing Stronghold and figure, hey, it might be a good game to play. Let's look at the Steam store and see what we see. So you open the Steam store, and since you haven't turned off autoplay, the trailer starts up. The first thing you'll notice is that the sprites are tiny. Over time, the sprites of the units have grown quite a bit. We can see this in games like Age of Empires and XCOM 2. Sprites in these games are quite large, often taking up quite a bit of the screen, and allowing you to tell at a glance what they're doing and who they are. Stronghold, however, assumes that you need a larger view and that can hold an entire castle in a single shot. Quite frankly, the trailer makes the game look a bit hectic, as you can have dozens of units on screen at the same time, and they're often moving in multiple directions. This reflects the game quite well, but it will most likely put off newcomers to the series, as it portrays a game that will test your ability to control large swarms of units. Of course, since it's a beloved classic, new players will see that the game has an overall very positive score, and if they're into the RTS genre, then they may be willing to take up the challenge. Scrolling down, we see that there are 21 missions, HD graphics, and, of course, an online support mode for up to 8 players. The feature bullet points are pretty standard and allow at a glance for players to see what the designer thinks are the best aspects of the game. If you like the look of it, since you are on Steam and will be able to buy it right away for about $7 Canadian, so it's not a high-risk proposition by any means. Since Stronghold is an old game, you can download and install it quickly, meaning that depending on your download speed, you can probably play it inside of 20 minutes. I would suggest playing the tutorial first before playing the actual game, since Stronghold is from an area where the tutorial and the game are completely separate parts of the software. Of course, once you boot up the game proper, you'll find yourself confronted by HD artwork from another era. You will often find these small square videos that are quite high quality, and it depicts the faces or actions. For example, each character that talks during the story has a short face animation that conveys a little character. It's a nice touch, but it's almost unnoticeable during the actual gameplay, since the little video is at the bottom in a small box off to the side. Most of your attention, however, is going to be on the main screen. As mentioned earlier, the sprites are tiny. Villagers appear to be the size of what they would be in real life, and that means that structures dominate the screen. The titular Strongholds. It's all pixel art, but it doesn't appear to be trying to be pixel art like the retro titles of games today. It looks like a group of people went over these tiny sprites and tried to add as much detail as they could, even with the limited pixel count. This leaves the ability for you to actually see individual bricks and walls and tiles on roofs. It looks like at a place that has become granular in nature. It's like looking at a place that has become granular in nature. Overall, Stronghold attempts to evoke images of medieval England. Not the bright and shiny England of Arthurian tales, nor the shit-soaked England that history talks of. Stronghold appears to be somewhere in between. It doesn't have a bright color palette, but it is neat and tidy. Buildings snap to a grid, and most, if not all, are square in nature, meaning that if you wanted, you could probably turn Stronghold into a voxel game if you had the time and inclination. I would suggest adding paint to that universe, or at least whitewash, because that was a thing that some of the more wealthy people did back then, and it would add a bit more color to the world. The isometric view is necessary, as you are working in a 3D world filled with 2D sprites. But since many of the buildings and defensive structures are tall enough to block your view of units and other buildings, further problems are avoided by the simple fact that your characters and enemies, for all of them being sprites, are color-coded. You are always blue, and the enemy is always not blue. I personally like red, because I don't want my enemies to see me bleed. But blue is good if you're coming over a hill. It's like sky camouflage, don't you know? Overall, the aesthetic and artwork is okay, though it could have been done a lot better, but perhaps not without fundamentally changing how the game plays. But the aesthetic is not the artwork alone. How does the music, sound design, and voice acting hold up? "You can't place that there, my lord." A phrase that I may grow to hate over time as I try to find the right spot to put my barracks is one of the many quips that your men, the peasants, and the lords will be saying. These simple lines of dialogue are what you will be hearing for the most part while playing, though there are fully voiced-acted sections where you will be hearing the many characters speak to you and each other. The music itself is light and fitting in with the medieval theme. Lutes and guitars strum you when it's nice and calm, and trumpets sound for battle. Overall, it's a light adventure style and makes the playing of the game more enjoyable than if you were sitting in silence. The sound effects themselves aren't very powerful, but they are quite nice. When clicking on various buildings, you can hear the fire in the baker's ovens, the twang of bows, and the clash of swords. The sounds stack on top of each other, and if you have a full-scale battle going on, it can be a bit grating as the same sounds are layered several times. It's fitting, though it could have been more visceral if there was less generic and more specific sounds, if you get where I'm coming from. Of course, the sound design comes along with little animations of soldiers thrusting spears, cutting wood, and clashing swords. It's simple, just as the sprites are, but it gives a sense of movement. However, in large groups, the animation smears together to make it impossible to see what is going on. And what is going on, at least in the military campaign, is cliché as all get out. You are a deposed prince, or some such, who is taking back land from the 4 regions who currently rule the many countries of medieval England. The campaign has you slowly taking over these counties as you work through various scenarios, from having to build a fort on an island to having to build a fort near another fort. If you can't tell, you're going to be building a lot of forts, or strongholds, if you will. It's a simple story. No Game of Thrones this, but it is serviceable and you can understand it at all resolutions, and even without volume. Since this game was actually designed to fit on tiny monitors, you can easily play the entire game at 800 by 600 and without sound, without missing anything except the voice acting and the nice music. But then you may want to leave this game after a few missions. The end of a mission is an excellent breakpoint after all, and you can't be playing games all day every day. So you stop playing and life gets crazy, and you come back after 5 months, sit down, boot her up, and think to yourself, how the fuck does this game work again? Good thing, perhaps, that the tutorial is simple and quick, and can, for the most part, get you up to speed on how to do the basics. However, Stronghold can become quite complex quite quickly, and the tutorial doesn't go over all of that, and you may become a bit lost if you try to pick up a campaign from where you left off. You can also forget about the game giving you the time and slack to relearn everything, because there's quite strict timers in the campaign, which gives you a challenge, but may make it a bit too challenging if you're starting out mid-game. There is an easy mode, though, and I would suggest that you simply continue your game on easy until you have the hang of it. But then, who would even think that in this age where turning down the difficulty is scoffed at like a cat on a counter? Most of the difficulty, for new players at least, may be in that Stronghold plays a bit differently than modern RTS games. Rather than needing to spawn new villagers, they spawn automatically based on your popularity, which is a thing not seen in many games that aren't about politics. You also can't make any hotkey groups, and so if you're going to send groups off in different directions, you'll need to micromanage them yourself, so I hope you've been keeping your StarCraft 2 skills honed. With the early levels being about half an hour apiece, you can easily get into the habit of doing one level a day as a routine. As someone who likes to marathon games through the entire night, the game gives me an ample opportunity to sit and think about how I'm wasting another night playing video games, just as I'm sure your mother wonders if aborting you is really out of the question after all this time. But unlike your sorry existence, Stronghold is actually fun to have around. It's not groundbreaking now, 15 years after its initial release, and lacks the quality of life features that newer games have put into place to better allow you, the pack of OCD hamsters that are RTS players, to maximize their efficiency. But at least the controls aren't as jank as a Wookiee's aim. Since it's snap to grid, you can easily place buildings wherever you choose. That is, if you can see the location through the tall walls, trees, and randomly pathing NPCs. You can scroll by bringing your mouse to the edge of the screen, or just use the arrows. I don't know if there are hotkeys for building, but the tutorial is full mouse, and that's how I play, so you may very well not even need a keyboard in order to play the game. Which would be a relief for those of you who need to use an on-screen keyboard for your day-to-day typing activities. A nice addition is that your units can't path to an area. If your units can't path to an area, your cursor will become a red no sign to let you know. And when you do put down a large placement of troops, little green dots appear, allowing you to see where and how they will be arrayed. You'll be using your mouse to click your way to victory in a series of very similar but legally distinct levels that puts you in the English countryside, defending against attackers from opposing players. I say players, meaning NPCs. The levels are functional, but they also look very much the same and play pretty much the same as well. Though, for the story mode, you use different types of crops to feed your villagers. It's all very similar. And similar and samey is how I would describe the feel of the game. It's not many an RTS that can make its click here and click there gameplay feel good, but I long for the day of an RTS that actually feels good to play in a very visceral, physical way. As it is, Stronghold is functional and aloof, just as all other RTS games when it comes to how they feel. It's also not very good at telling you quite how its mechanics work. But they do work, even if you don't quite understand. This gives you time to figure out exactly what each villager is doing, and what you can do to make their job easier. Usually this means putting them near the stockpile, though, so perhaps it isn't so unclear what you need to do. On normal mode, the game is challenging enough that I can and will get quite close to failure due to the fact that I'm a bit slow in setting up my various building chains, and I'm not exactly a master architect when it comes to fortifications. This isn't helped by the fact that the isometric view hampers my ability to see where I'm putting my walls, but that's not the totality of it. Stronghold expects you not only to get the ball rolling, but to keep it rolling, sometimes uphill. This is a challenge in that you need to make your forces larger and larger to take care of the escalating threats, and that puts strain on your supply train, which puts pressure on you to place everything exactly where it needs to be and expand when you need to expand. Of course, once you beat the challenge, you are met with the mission complete screen and are faced with a question. Do I play another 30-minute mission, or do I stop for the day? And if you do stop, do you start again? If you like the story, then you probably will. Same if you like the challenge. But what if you were just defeated 3 times in a row? Does the game give you any confidence that you will win this time? Not really, but it does have a hint system, though it took me quite a while to find it. But then it may not help that much. And if you quit between levels, you'll tell yourself that you'll come back and try it later. But for right now, you need a relaxing game, and then perhaps you never pick it up again. When it comes to failure, Stronghold generally can tell you that you did fail, but it isn't very good at making suggestions for how not to fail in the future. There are the hints, but there's only one hint per level, as far as I can see. So if you're failing and you don't know why, you may feel quite frustrated with how Stronghold is silent on the matter and how to get good. Overall, though, Stronghold has one main strength. The campaign is paced well enough that you want to keep playing, keep making your Stronghold more efficient, and fielding a larger and larger army. It makes this feature the star that you see at all times, but it doesn't hide its weaknesses either. The main two that I can think of is that the isometric view gets in your way more often than not, and the second one is that you're not quite told what everything does, leaving you to guess how many people a single dairy farm feeds, and having to scramble to make more if it turns out that it doesn't feed all your people. At the end of the day, though, I like RTS games, and I like Stronghold, and I believe that you will too, so go and pick it up. It's only $7 after all. So, what's the final game score? It's okay. I'd recommend it to the masses, but this isn't going to blow anybody's mind. Now on to the developer's notes. These notes are to those in my audience who wish to learn what they should and should not do if they were to make a game that's similar to this one. These are my insights as a hobby game developer, and as someone who plays and thinks about video games critically. If you aren't interested, you can stop here and you won't be missing anything. So, you want to make a game like Age of Empires, Anno 1404, Stronghold, or perhaps a game more like StarCraft or Company of Heroes. Here's my advice. If you want long-time user retention, your main goal will be making interesting scenarios for your players to think their way through. Pick a time limit in which you want your players to complete a scenario and make it happen. Stronghold does this by having the enemies attack at certain times. But you can do this by giving objectives which have time limits, or by having the enemy attack in timed intervals. It helps if your objective is just to hold out, as it can be difficult to make the player move fast if they are the aggressor and think they have infinite time. You will also want to take notes on the main quality of life issue that comes up in these kinds of games. How many of Product X do I need to satisfy Consumer Y? For example, I had to reason out that I needed 2 wheat fields in order to feed 1 mill, which in turn fed 4 bakeries. A less astute player may never have worked this out and instead thought that just because they were a production line that they needed 1 and 1 and 1. This may have caused them to fail the level over and over again because they were wasting resources. If you can see this happening in your game, either have this information clearly on the buildings or have hints that tell the players about it. You'll also want to think about if your player wants to be defensive or aggressive. Aggressive play is encouraged by large armies that move fast, and there being no need to build up a base in order for them to be built. Perhaps, if you want players to be aggressive, they should start with an attacking force and need to take key locations fairly quickly in order to win. If you want defensive play, on the other hand, you have many games to work with. All the ones mentioned above support and encourage defensive play because they offer defensive structures that give the defender an advantage. Next, you'll want to think, how important is strategy in my title? If it's not important at all, give the players vast swarms of creatures to throw at the enemy and make them splat and fight in an interesting way. If tactics are very important in your game, you may want advanced squad mechanics, the ability to plan actions in advance, and the ability to coordinate actions so that you can launch multiple attacks all at once. The first is about visceral combat that's fun to sit down and watch with popcorn. Total War Shogun 2 has this, and you can zoom in and watch a single samurai take down 10 attacking samurai one by one before finally being struck down. The second is about outthinking your opponent and using the game mechanics to win the fight, often against a much larger force. So think about how you're going to use terrain and how you're going to make different units stack up against each other. But that's all for now. If you liked this video, please leave a like and subscribe. If you agree or disagree about anything that I said in this video, please leave a comment down below, and I may get to it in my comment response video. I will see you guys in the next video.